Welcome everyone to What the Force and a little urgent mini episode, I guess, because we just had some news. And I'm Marie Claire Gould, and with me to share the news is my good friend Hammy. Hi, Hammy.
Hi, everyone.
We were recording a different episode that's going to come out in a couple of weeks from now. It'll be really cool once it gets out. But as soon as we finished recording, I got a urgent message from Matt, Blind Man Baldwin on Twitter, and he was like, "You got to check this out. It's massive news because it kind of changes all of our expectations about what the future trilogy would be like." Hammy, would you like to share the news?
Yes, I would. So, David Benioff and DB Weiss, often known as D&D from Game of Thrones, they're the showrunners of Game of Thrones. They are walking away from Star Wars and their proposed trilogy. So, we were all wondering what was going to happen after The Rise of Skywalker. And their trilogy was lined up to be the next one. Star Wars was going to take a break for 3 years, and then in 2022, they were going to release the first in their trilogy. And so it was just announced by Deadline. They made a statement, and Kathleen Kennedy made a statement, and they're officially no longer going to be working on Star Wars.
Although, like, maybe initially when I heard the news kind of before the end of the Game of Thrones season, I was kind of excited about having people who kind of knew combat, knew, I don't know, large story, new epic story. But the more the end of the Game of Thrones season had come out, the more unsettled I was with the storytelling leading up to the end, where I was very dissatisfied with the end of Game of Thrones. It really did feel like these two creators, these two storytellers didn't actually understand the story that they were speaking to. And Hammy, you used to be, or you still are, part of the Song of Fire and Ice fandom.
Yeah. So I actually read A Song of Ice and Fire when I was in college. So I was really excited when the show started. So to put that in a little bit of perspective, A Dance with Dragons, the last book, came out the summer of the first season of Game of Thrones. So I've been on this journey waiting for the next book, and Game of Thrones was basically a way to kind of see the story told. And I was excited to see how it ended as well, because, George R. R. Martin is obviously taking a long time to conclude the story. But what ended up personally was that about season 4, I just started noticing that as they moved away from the source material, they were no longer focusing on the things that I loved most of the story and I thought were at the core of the story. A lot of the thematic elements, a lot of the fantasy elements, things that were important to the characters centrally, were no longer as important. And battles and dragons and all of that. Not that dragons are bad, but they are there in the story for a reason. They're there symbolically for a reason as part of Dany's journey, and they were no longer kind of being utilized in that way. So I actually stopped watching after season 4, and I didn't start watching again until this past season when my friends said, "You need to suck it up and start watching again." So I said, okay, let me give this a shot. And I did. There were still episodes that I appreciated and I loved, and I still cried at certain moments. Season 6, the last 2 episodes are probably some of my favorite episodes in the entire show. But the execution of the final season it was just bad on all fronts, for book fans and for the general audience. And I think part of that was because they were moving more and more away from the source material, and they were having with things on their own and reach a specified ending that George R. R. Martin had in mind. I do think a lot of the ending in the books will be similar, but basically, I don't think their execution was right, and I don't think even from the early stages that they had an understanding of what was trying to convey with the story. It very much wasn't about the battles. It wasn't about the gratuitous adult situation. All of that was there to bring reality to the world, but that definitely wasn't the point of the story. As from the title, A Song of Ice and Fire. It's about ice and fire, balance, a lot of things very similar to Star Wars. So then when the announcement was made that they were going to be taking over a trilogy and they would, be the future of Star Wars after The Rise of Skywalker, I was pretty upset and pretty disappointed and worried. The best case scenario in my mind was that they would do kind of what they were doing with Game of Thrones, where they would be producers, that they hopefully wouldn't be writing very much. They would be depending on the story group, and they would bring in a team of writers and all that. But it just made me nervous from the outset as soon as they were given an entire trilogy, especially one that I love so much.
Yeah, and like how they handled female issues specifically in Game of Thrones, and I've seen every single episode of it. So like I know, and I watched it all along the way. I had never read the books, but they are quite thick. George R. R. Martin.
They're beautiful. They're beautifully written. I mean,
it's
they're
great.
They're
like,
amazing.
I've heard the descriptions. I've read the first like 3 chapters of the first one, and then I was like, I do not have time. But you know, I was hoping that they were brought in to kind of almost tell medieval Star Wars. You know, like the past, right? Like they're trying to tell, you know, what is the past all about from a Star Wars perspective, when we had true Jedi Knights, we had, you know, honor and codes and chivalry, and we had these epic battles, and that's why I thought they were being brought on, like to kind of tell maybe an epic war or something from that perspective, which they seemed like they were good at. But since the end of Game of Thrones, we have learned more and more how in some ways they, you know, don't respect, you know, themes and motifs. They have this terrible quote where they say themes and motifs are for grade 8 English class or something like that.
Yeah,
like
eighth grade book reports is what they
eighth grade book reports, which is just like, do you not understand that's the age that Star Wars is trying to hit at? Like that is Star Wars.
Well, so, not just that. I mean, it's such a big part of the Star Wars storytelling, and I mean, really, it's part of any kind of good storytelling.
Yeah.
If you went to George R. R. Martin and said, "Hey, you know, your books don't have themes," I think he'd be a little angry. So, no, but
yeah, and not pulling on those humanistic themes that connect us to, you know, larger conversations that we have across ourselves and our communities and with our friends. It's like, how do you have those conversations without themes? It's just, it was just so mind-blowing and weird to hear, you know, something. I kind of went through this like dissidence where I was like, I'm so disappointed. Like, why do I feel so weird about the end, and why is it so weird? And yeah, and it seems like, you know, especially recently, with the recent talk that they participated in, that a lot came out in that.
So on Twitter, it was a person whose handle is for Aria. They were at the Austin Film Festival, and they did basically a live tweet. And this was on October 26th. So last week, they did a live tweet of everything that David and Dan were discussing about Game of Thrones. And it was a lot of post-game breakdown, basically, of what was in their heads, what were they thinking, a lot of that. So some of the ideas they were saying rubbed a lot of people the wrong way after coming out of season 8. I'll give you a few examples of their tweets that were kind of got people upset a little bit. So it was about how they were trying to boil down the elements of books, and they said they didn't really try and do that. The scope was too big, so they kind of just focused on the scenes that they were trying to depict, and that the show was about power. And that's definitely not what the show's about. That's definitely not what the books are about. There is power plays happening, but it's always in the context of a wider struggle. I think most people who are familiar with season 8 know that the Night King was kind of created to be an enemy, but the idea in the books is that the Night King doesn't exist, and that there's a big existential threat that's happening to all of our main characters. So although the power play between each of them is going on in the smaller scope of everything, there's like this bigger threat that's occurring. So that's not what a lot of people would the focus, and should have been related to the ending. And so that kind of makes sense to why they ended the show the way that they did, with Dany and all of that. And then there's another one where Dan is saying that Game of Thrones was basically an expensive film school, that they had no idea how to work with costume designers, and it was like a bigger learning experience. And that's learning on the job is okay. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
fine.
Ryan had to learn how to do a big production because he had only done
Indie
indie
films.
film before, and that's
Right.
okay, but it's like they disrespected the concept of like expertise and like
Right. And the
genre
craft
and
that,
the craft.
yeah. And it kind of just reaffirms like, okay, the fans aren't all crazy
Hmm.
thinking this, and to somehow all be on the same page after 10 years of debating and stuff. Somehow everyone's on the same page about disappointment with the final season. And so, yeah, so basically, so you can go look at the live tweets. The handle is for Arya, and she has all the live tweets talking about that. But then tonight, as Marie Claire and I finished recording, we were just chatting, and this Deadline article got released with a statement from David and Dan, along with a statement from Kathleen Kennedy about them leaving Star Wars.
Hmm.
So I'll go ahead and read that part. So from David and Dan, they say, "We love Star Wars. When George Lucas built it, he built us too. Getting to talk about him and the current Star Wars team was the thrill of a lifetime, and we'll always be indebted to the saga that changed everything." They go on to say, "There are only so many hours in the day, and we felt we could not do justice to both Star Wars and our Netflix projects. So we are regretfully stepping away."
And then Kathleen Kennedy did choose to not permanently shut the door, but to me, this is very much like the, if we have another opportunity line that you sometimes hear from some recruiters. Kennedy didn't close the door. In her send-off statement on Monday, she said, "David Benioff and Dan Weis are incredible storytellers. We hope to include them in the journey forward when they are able to step away from their busy schedule and focus on Star Wars." But that's the like, we'll be busy, we'll call you, not you'll call us kind of situation. I feel like you need, I really do not feel like they would have chosen to step away like this without that. Somebody said that they brought on Kevin Feige to say Kevin Feige's going to work on a film as from a producer perspective to basically fill the shoes in case this needed to happen. Like they heard stuff and they thought things might happen, and that's why they were bringing Kevin Feige on to produce a Star Wars movie. But who knows, right? Who knows what's
Right.
going on in the hearts of men? Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a waiting game at this point. We have to kind of see how it all shakes out after the Rise of Skywalker. And there was also a recent interview with Ryan. I tweeted it. I don't know if I can pull it up really quick, but either way, Ryan confirmed that he's still talking to Lucasfilm and that he's still working on his movies,
Mm-hmm.
but that the timing of everything is obviously still being decided. So, and I don't think, like that thread took off on Twitter. I don't think that was like that's not making the decision for everyone. I think this might have
No.
been in talks for a while, and they just made the announcement today.
Yeah, they probably knew
Mhm.
something was off because originally they were like a trilogy, maybe more, and then it got slowly shrunk back to one movie, and then they were really busy with Netflix, and I think that Lucasfilm has been slowly trying to detach themselves. But again, this is all just industry speculation, which I'm not incredibly good at. But it definitely is good news for us who are lovers of the primary themes and motifs of Star Wars and the storytelling that speaks to human nature, because unfortunately, with the biggest experiment that they went under, they were unsuccessful.
And I mean, honestly, even when their Netflix contract was announced, I was kind of surprised because I didn't know how they could do both.
Both,
So
yeah.
it just didn't make any sense. And the amount of time and care that I would personally want being put into Star Wars movies, even with a 3-year break, like it's not a joke to do a Star Wars movie, and I treat it as something that's expendable or just being churned out. So so it's probably going to work out better for both parties. Hopefully they'll have more time to work on their independent projects with Netflix as well.
The hope is that going forward, we get people who love Star Wars, people who get Star Wars, and more diversity within the storytelling crew to tell us different angles of Star Wars.
Yep.
And that's all we got today. That's the news. We are happy about it. We hope that they learn from the themes and motifs of Star Wars and incorporate them into their next journey on Netflix so that maybe someday, through some sort of redemption arc, they're, ready to actually walk into a storytelling that would be better for them.
Yay! All right.
So, Hemi, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me, Balance Padawan, on Twitter. Come find me and we'll talk about this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.